Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So what today's topic is about JavaScript arrays. What I'm going to do mostly is show you guys examples with code rather than necessarily go through a bunch of boring slides. JavaScript arrays are a little bit different than what you may expect in either C# or even in Java, because JavaScript arrays are nothing more than a object. It's a special type of object, but it is just a object. So one of the things we can do is we look at a way to create a array. We can create the array in a literal form. So var x equals, and its bracket, the values that you want to put in the array, and then close bracket. When we actually look at this object over here, you can see that we have a key value pair of 0 through 4, which is the index, and then the actual values. What makes arrays a little bit different than a normal object, it will also add a length parameter, which will give you the length of the arrays, and its prototype will be pointing to the array object that we've created. Now, one of the things is that in JavaScript on its arrays, it is not associative, and so the key value pair for your arrays are only integers. You cannot use strings or other objects to define that key. It is only integers. So that's why you'll see that when you need to get a value from an array, the only way you can actually do that is with an integer as the index to or index of where you want to grab that value. The reason being is because strings and other values are actually in objects how you will go and find parameters inside of your object. So if you remember from the other day when we did something like this, we can actually get that object by saying x, open bracket, the string of text, close bracket, and we can actually grab the value from that object. So the main difference between arrays and regular objects is that the prototype of objects points to the object, and arrays prototype will point to the array's prototype object. Okay, but it is an actual object. So one of the things we can do is we take this object and we look at it. We can see it says 1, 2, 3, 4, but we can also assign a function to it. Now we look at just x is 1, 2, 3, 4, but if we say x.text, it actually calls that function and will print out log. Okay. The other thing is, since arrays are actually nothing more than objects, they are actually references to an array object. This is important because we discussed in the morning meeting a little bit about how to clear out an array. Unfortunately, with Wismo Grid, it gets to be a little bit more difficult because in Wismo, they actually make a copy of the array object that you pass into it, and so you actually are pointing to the reference of the object. So take a look at how that works. So we do a x object, and then we create a y object that is pointing to x. So we look at x, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4. If we do y, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we go in and say y0 is equal to some text, and we look at y, we get what we expect, text, and then 2, 3, 4. But if we look at x, we also will see that it says text 2, 3, 4. That is because both of these objects are pointing to the same reference object that we have. The reason why this is important with the Wismo Grid is because it's a reference. If we come back and we tell x to equal a new array, and we look at x, it will now be pointing to a new reference object, which is 6, 7, 8, and 9. But y will still be pointing to the original reference object that we had. So when you reassign x to a new object, you do not destroy that original reference object. It is still there and still can be pointed to. The reason why this is important is because in your code, if you have an array object that you pass in to the data types for the grids, and you go in and you reassign that scope item to a new array, that does not affect the original reference object that you're talking to. So in this particular example, if we come back and we assign y back to x, now we look at y and x together, the same thing. To clear out both of those objects, what we would do is we'll do something like y.length is equal to 0. Now when we look at y, it will be empty array, and we'll look at x, and it will be an empty array, because that parameter is on the reference object, and we're not assigning a new reference object to either one of those variables. Any questions on that? Because it is something that makes it a little bit difficult when you're using third parties and you're passing arrays into them, to realize that you have a reference object, not the object itself sometimes. If they're actually doing stuff on the object itself, then that's a little bit different. But 9 times out of 10, you'll see Wismo will make a copy of the object and not use the object itself, which means you're actually pointing to that reference object. Okay, so since we're pointing to an array object, on its prototype we actually have lots of methods that we can create or do things on our arrays. And so here are some of them that we have, and we're going to go through a bunch of these and show examples of them. Probably the most popular and common one you'll get will be push. What push does is it will add your element to the tail end of that object. So you can see here we did x10. We look at, we have 10. If we do another push, you can see it added it to the end. Okay. The next one is unshift, or let's go with pop. So now if we do x pop, it will remove the last item on the array. So you can see there we removed the last item of that array. The reason why you have pop and push is JavaScript is a prototype language. Lots of the prototypal language actually inherit themselves from old assembly language programs, and when you're dealing with linked lists and arrays, the original commands need to be very short and tell you exactly what you're doing. So pop and push is a real common one to pull things on and off of an array stack from the back end. What's nice though is we also have some other ones. So let's add back to this list a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. We actually have shift. So shift will remove items off the front of the array. So from position 0, it will start removing stuff from the very front. We also have unshift, which is actually adding items to the front of the list. So you can see we added one right back. And so for pull and pushing things on and off the array stack, these are going to be the most popular ones you'll see: pop, push, shift, and unshift, depending on whether or not you want to remove things from the back end of the array, or add things to the back end of the array, or vice versa, remove things from the front, or add things to the front. Any questions on that? On the items where you are removing items on and off the list, you will get the element that you popped off of the list. So on pop and shift, you get the actual value that you are popping on and off, and push and unshift will give you a number of items on the list itself. And so if you originally had 6 items on your list and you push something onto the list, it then becomes 7. So I'm going to create 2 arrays now. So I look at X and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I look at Y and I have 6, 7, 8, 9. So one of the things a lot of times you will have to do is you want to combine 2 arrays. And the way you do that, there's a couple ways you can do that depending on how you want to do it. So the first way is to use concat. So now if we look at test, you can see that's a concatenation of X and Y. I have 1 through 9. But I have not touched the original arrays with concat. Okay. Now, if I want to only have one array, one of the things I can do is I'm going to do X equals X dot concat Y. Now when I look at X, it is my full array, and when I look at Y, I have the original Y array. And that is one way of doing it. A lot of people don't like that because it gets a little bit confusing for especially novice developers when you start using a value to call itself and add itself back on. So another way of doing this is going to lead me into my next example of what you can do with arrays. So if I wanted to, I can do array dot prototype dot push dot apply X comma Y. And when I hit return, I look at X, it will have my full array, and Y will have my last array. Okay. So what's happening here is, if you remember from my discussion on Thursday, talking about objects and ways you can call objects from other objects, is I mentioned being able to call a function using either call or apply and adding this object as part of the parameters for both of those calls. The difference between call and apply is apply the first value is the this that you want to pass into it, and the second value is the array of parameters that you're wanting to pass into it. So what happens here is I'm actually calling push, and I'm not wanting to push just one value. I want to pass all the values into Y. So I give it my this, and what it does is it basically goes through each one of these items and adds, or calls push for each one of the items in my array. And that's how we come up with 1 through 9. If I do something like this, a call, I can use call like this, and because call has a common denominator of arguments that you're passing into the variable, you can actually do something like this. And it went past what I was showing, so it's not showing everything. Another cool thing is with arrays is if I pass an array in there like this, you can see here at the last value, I've actually passed in my object array as one of the attributes or one of the elements within my array. One of the things about arrays in JavaScript is that it's not typed, and so you can have a mixture of data types in your elements within your arrays. So you can have an integer, a string, an object, an array object, a function object. So you can actually have an array of functions if you really wanted to do something like that. So it's definitely not typed, strictly typed on your arrays. I know like in some languages, you can only have one type in your array objects. It has to be either a string or the object that you're passing into it, but it can only be one type. When in JavaScript, that is not a requirement. Any questions so far on that?
Hey Jason, this is Reggie. Is there a limit on the number of nested members that an array can have, or is it something ridiculous that we most likely won't reach?
It's something ridiculous. It's a big int. Is how big a array can be. Now, with each inside of it, so if you do array of arrays, then it's as big as you want it until you hit memory at that point. Before array, it's a big int, which is some billion, like 8 billion elements you can put in it. Something like that. So it's really big, and likelihood of you reaching that unless you're in the financial stuff where you're trying to grab minute transactions for the last 5 years, you probably won't reach it.
Okay, thanks.
So those are some of the real basic stuff. Now I want to talk about some of the other interesting methods that we have. So let's go back to a nice little simple one. There's a method called join. And what join does is it will take your array and put it into a string format. So you can see here when I say x.join, it returns the string values of that. What's nice about join is that if you pass a parameter into it, that will be what separates the objects in your array. So you can here I see I put pipe, and so it returned a pipe instead of comma. If I want to do pluses, I can do pluses and it will return pluses. So it's very good to, when you want to print back out values that are in a string format for your array. The next one is slice. So there's maybe situations where what I want to do is I want to grab the 3 and the 4 and do something with these two numbers. So the first value of slice is the index that you want to grab to start off with. I want to grab 2. And then the last value that you are looking for, but it will not include that. So here I'll go with 4. And you can see here I grabbed 3 and 4. This particular one does not actually touch the original array. It is just slicing bits and pieces that you want out of your array so you can go and do something with it. And it creates a brand new array, so it has a new reference to that object. So whenever you touch that object, it will not touch the original array that you are using. Now for the more fun piece. So, and wish they would have changed the name of this, because slice and splice are very similar. It gets, you can forget which one you're trying to use. What splice is it will actually work on the array itself. So here, the first value is where you want to start at. So we want to start at position 2. And then we tell it how many elements we want to remove. So here I'm telling it to remove 2 elements. And if I hit return, you can see it brought out 3 and 4 as my return object. But if I actually look at X, now I only have 1, 2, and 5. Now, one of the things that is kind of interesting about splice, though, get my original object back in here, is when I use splice, I can actually add values back in here now. So I want to add apple, and I want to add sugar. So you can see I actually removed the last 3 items, because I wanted to remove 4 items. But now when I look at my array, it comes back as 1, 2, apple, and sugar, because anything after the second parameter will get added back into your array. So let me give a little bit different example. So I'm going to go 1 through 5, and I want to splice only 2 items this time. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Okay, X. So now you can see I splice into the middle of my array, apple and sugar, starting at position 3, 0, 1, 2. So any questions about that? Like I said, it's really useful for adding things into the middle of your array.
So what the first slice, you pass 2 and 4, why it comes with 3 and 4? You should 3, 4, 5, right? The first slice method you called.
Okay, so slice is different than splice. Slice, what it will do is the first variable is where you want to start at, and the second variable is where you want to end at, but not including that element. So let's get my original element here. So we'll go 1 through 5. X dot slice, I want to start at, say, let's do a different position. So I want to start here to 2. So I'm going to go 0, 1, and I want to end, say, I want to take the 4 out. So I want to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I'm not including the last value here. So if I hit return, you can see it brought back out 2, 3, 4, but I have not touched my original array. With splice, the first value is where you want to start at, and then the second value is how many items you want to pull out.
I see. Okay. That's a difference. Okay.
Yeah, there's a slight difference in them. Okay. So let's make a little bit bigger array this time. So I have 1 through 10. And say I have a requirement that says I need to pull out all of the even number items in my array. The best way of doing this is with the function filter. Now what filter does is it requires a callback function. That callback function will have an element. And what it will do is it will go through each one of the elements in your array, and whatever returns as true, then it will add that to a new array that gets passed out. So what I want to do here is I want to say return element mod 2 is equal to 0. Okay, so now you can see what happened is whenever element mod 2 is equal to 0, it returned true, and so it added this to a new array, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. This is a lot faster. In fact, let me do this real quick. Raw temp, and we'll do this equal to then we'll look at temp. You see temp is the object that the array object that I wanted. The reason why this is real powerful is let's take a little bit different example. So we're going to say var x is equal to an array of objects. So the text is equal to none. And we got another object where the text is equal to some. Okay, so now what I can do is I can for var temp equal to x filter. And I want to give it a function element. And I'm going to say if element dot text is equal to sum, return true, else return false. Missing something here. Let's see, there's one if that returns if else. Let's see here, return X, that closes that out, that closes that out. Let's try this again.
You need to close your if.
Is that it? Okay, so function, let's close that guy out. Okay, then we have element, there's that, then we have if, element dot text equals sum, return true, else return false. I forgot my closing quote here. Alright, so now if I look at temp, you can see I have my object. There's one object in there that says sum. Okay, so the filter makes it really powerful because when you pass that element into it, you can do anything on that element that you're actually passing in. Is that array element that you are looking for. You don't necessarily have to do a for else loop just so you can cycle through that items. The one that is kin to this is every. So if I do a vol temp equal to x dot every, actually what I can do is do this piece up here. Now look at temp, it will say false. That's because not every single element in my x is a even number. But if I come in here and say x var equal to 2, 4, 6, 8, and I rerun this, you can see now it comes back as true. So every is very useful in if you need to verify that every single element within your object actually does what you think it should do. Okay? So it is a type of what you wanted. So one of the big examples I've seen is sometimes people want to know before they start actually running something is to look in the array and make sure that every object has a name. And if it doesn't have a name, then it will kick back a verification error that you're missing a name on your object. There's also a map function. So let's take vol x is equal to 1, 2, 3. If we do a map, we can pass in a function such as square root, and we now look at x, or the return value of that. Let's do like this. So we look at temp now. Temp will be the square root of the value that was passed into it. So 1, 1.4 is on 2, same thing all the way down to 3. And so what this does is you can basically pass an array. If you want to do the same thing on every single element, the map function is what you do on that. So one of the examples I've seen that's popular is like 2 uppercase. So you have an array of strings. Rather than doing a for loop or all that, you create a small little function, or you just say string uppercase, and then it will uppercase everything for you. So it's real convenient if you need to do something that is on every single object that you have. And that's most of the common methods that you'll use in JavaScript for arrays. There's not a whole lot of others. But what is nice about JavaScript is, like I said, you can create your own functions. So I'm going to create a function in JSON. There we go. So now if I go x.json, it'll print out the first value. But if I make a new array, now look at y, and I do y.json, you can see there is no function called JSON, because I actually assigned my function only to my object. But luckily, because of JavaScript being a prototypal language, you can actually do something like this. Is we take the array in the prototype, we can add functions onto this. So let's call this first element, second element, call it, add that one. Second element is equal to a function, and I want to return this one. Now on X, I can do a second element, and on Y, I can do a second element. So because I've added to the prototype, this is now available for all of my array objects to be able to do things with. So there was well, there still is a JavaScript framework out there called Prototype.js. And that's how they did everything. It was a competitor kind of to jQuery back in 95, 96. The guy who wrote Prototype.js actually then got hired on by another company, so he doesn't do a whole lot with it anymore. And the other thing is, his view was if we were going to do stuff to the DOMs and to other objects, we should use a prototype and do it that way, hence the name, rather than the way jQuery does it, where it passes functions along to everything. And so all you really have is a function of an object. You never have actually changed the object itself. So if you look at Prototype.js, you'll see that they do a lot of this prototyping. Angular does some. Even jQuery has now gotten into the mix, and they will actually add things to the global array so that you can use it on all array objects. The downside to it is you can actually overwrite one of the JavaScript functions for arrays if you're not careful. So I can technically come in here and change the second element to say sort, and now I would overwrite the sort function for all arrays. You will see some people do this sometimes because, you know, there are people out there who have certain sort algorithms that they like and only want to use, and they'll actually change the default browser sort function, array function to fit their needs. So just remember that when you do array.prototype, you're touching the global array, not necessarily just a local array. One of the ways of getting around that is if you extend array to be your own object, then you can touch that particular object prototype and not necessarily touch all of the array objects at that point. And that's basically arrays in a nutshell. When you go into the consoles, you can see some of the elements that, some of the other functions you may have. There is a for each. I'd recommend not using it. When you do all the testing, for each is actually the slowest way to go through a array of objects. The fastest way is to go backwards through your array list. A very close second is going forward through your array list with a for loop. So unless you just absolutely have to, don't use a raw for each. Now when we're dealing with Angular and using the Angular for each, which is a $sign, that's a little bit different because with its for each, when it gets done with it, it will look at the digest and decide whether or not it needs to fire off a digest call or not. So within Angular, it's a good thing to use the Angular for each because it is doing a little bit more stuff behind the scenes than just a simple for each. And then we also have a standard index of, which will, you pass in a value and it will give you the index of that value. ToString is a lot like join. Join was there before ToString. So that's why you have both of them. ToString is more of an ECMA 5 specification. And then you have sort and reverse. So if we have an array, var x equal to 6, 7, 8, 9, like that. We can do x sort. Actually sort the array that way. And then if we do a reverse, which in this case won't do what we want to do, but x reverse is putting the array in backwards order. So we, what we basically did here was flip-flop how we were doing things. And then the only other one there is reduce, but I don't think anyone will ever use reduce. I'm not really going to go over that. We talked about concatenation, and that's all the functions that we have on JavaScript for arrays. One of the things, like I said, to make sure you understand is remember that arrays are all just objects, and because they are objects, you're working on a reference to the object, not necessarily the object itself. So if you start saying with variables and saying a variable equals another array, remember that's just a reference to that object. Any questions? Okay, well if there's no questions, then I guess we'll close this call out. I'm going to try to do a small document that has all these different functions on there. That it would be kind of a cheat sheet to show one or two small examples and then send that to everyone probably either on late Tuesday or Wednesday. And then later this week I will probably have a talk on JS lint, and we can talk a little bit about that. And once again, if you guys have anything you want to talk about or get clarification on, please send me an email and we'll set up a talk and we'll talk about how to go about doing what you want to do. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Thanks.